mother of 7-year-old girl, passed away. Johnny Depp attends funeral and does the... It was a cold, overcast day when a small community gathered at the cemetery. The wind blew gently, carrying with it a deep sense of loss. Among the mourners stood a 7-year-old girl named Emma, her tiny hand clutching a white rose as she stared at the freshly dug grave. Her mother had passed away unexpectedly, leaving Emma and her small grieving family behind. The weight of her mother's absence hung heavy in the air. Emma, her eyes red from tears, wore a simple black dress that seemed too big for her fragile frame. She was quiet, almost too quiet, as though the grief was too big for her young heart to bear. Her mother had been her world, her source of love and comfort, and now she was gone. Her father stood beside her, his face pale and eyes distant, barely able to hold himself together. Among the crowd of mourners, however, was an unexpected presence. People whispered and exchanged glances as they noticed a familiar face standing near the back. It was none other than Johnny Depp, the Hollywood actor known for his iconic roles, stood quietly with a solemn expression, dressed in a dark suit and sunglasses. Johnny was there, but not for the reasons anyone might have imagined. There had been no media reports, no flashy headlines. He had come in silence, his presence mysterious, yet comforting. The connection between Johnny Depp and Emma's family was unclear to most. Some speculated that he might have known Emma's mother from years ago, or perhaps he had been moved by the tragedy and wanted to offer support. But Johnny was never one to chase the limelight for personal gain. There was something deeper, more personal about his being there. He wasn't just attending the funeral to pay his respects. He was there for a reason that no one could have guessed. As the funeral service continued, Johnny stepped forward, his eyes lingering on the small girl standing by her mother's grave. There was something in his gaze, a tenderness, an unspoken connection. He bent down, picking up a rose that had fallen to the ground, and walked slowly toward Emma. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Johnny knelt down beside her, handing her the rose. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Your mom was a beautiful soul," he said gently. "She'll always be with you." Emma nodded, her tiny finger wrapping around the stem of the rose, as though holding on to a piece of her mother. There was a sadness in her eyes that only a child who had experienced deep loss could understand. But there was also something else, hope. It was as if Johnny's words had given her something to hold on to in the midst of her grief. But that wasn't the end of it. What happened next left everyone stunned. Johnny stood up, his face serious, and asked to say a few words. The crowd, curious and puzzled, watched as he walked toward the front. He removed his sunglasses, his eyes filled with emotion, and began to speak. He talked about life, loss, and love. But then he did something completely unexpected. With the eyes of the entire crowd on him, Johnny made a promise to Emma, a promise that would change the course of her life forever. The whispers and speculation stopped, as everyone listened in disbelief. No one could have predicted what was about to happen. As Johnny finished speaking, there was a pause, a moment of silence, as people tried to process what they had just heard. Emma's father looked at Johnny, his expression unreadable, and Emma, still holding onto the rose, stared up at Johnny with wide eyes. But what had Johnny promised? And why? The air was thick with unanswered questions, and no one knew exactly what would come next. Johnny Depp had not only shown up at the funeral, he had done something no one could have imagined, something that would leave a lasting impact on a young girl's life. The funeral ended, but the story was far from over. Everyone left the cemetery with the weight of Johnny's words hanging in the air, wondering what the future held for Emma. Johnny Depp's presence had turned an already heartbreaking day into something even more extraordinary. The whispers and rumors would spread, but the truth behind Johnny's actions remained a mystery, at least for now. And that's where we leave it for today. The promise Johnny Depp made to Emma, what it was, and how it would change her life, remains unknown. But one thing is certain. This is only the beginning of a story filled with heartache, hope, and the unexpected. So, stay tuned for the next part of this incredible story, where we uncover the truth behind Johnny Depp's unthinkable gesture and how it will shape Emma's future. You won't want to miss it. In the days following the funeral, the small town buzzed with whispers and rumors about Johnny Depp's unexpected appearance. No one could understand what had driven him to not only attend the funeral, but to make that heartfelt promise to little Emma. People speculated, gossiping in hushed tones at the local cafes and shops. But no one had the full story. Emma's father, Michael, was equally puzzled. He hadn't known Johnny personally, and as far as he could recall, there was no connection between his wife and the actor. Yet Johnny's words at the funeral had been sincere, as though he had known Emma's mother on a much deeper level. As Michael struggled to make sense of it all, he was also grappling with the overwhelming burden of raising Emma on his own. He had always been a devoted father, but losing his wife had left a void that seemed impossible to fill. Emma, despite her quiet nature, had become even more withdrawn since the funeral. She barely spoke, and when she did, her words were filled with sadness and confusion. She missed her mother terribly, and no matter how hard Michael tried to comfort her, he knew that her grief was too big for him to ease alone. Johnny Depp, however, had not disappeared from their lives. A few days after the funeral, a letter arrived at their doorstep, addressed to Emma in Johnny's handwriting. It was a simple note, but it carried a powerful message. In it, Johnny promised to check in on Emma and her father, offering to help in any way he could. He didn't explain why, but there was a warmth and sincerity in his words that made it clear this was not just a fleeting gesture. He truly cared. As the days passed, Johnny kept his promise. He sent small gifts to Emma, a book her mother had loved, a stuffed animal she used to sleep with as a child. And each time, it brought a brief smile to her face. But beneath the surface, there was still an unanswered question. Why was Johnny doing this? And how did he know so much about Emma's mother? Michael couldn't let it go. He needed answers. One night, after Emma had gone to bed, he decided to confront Johnny. He dialed the number Johnny had left in the note and was surprised when the actor picked up almost immediately. The conversation started politely, but it quickly became tense. Michael asked Johnny directly how he had known his wife, and after a long pause, Johnny finally revealed the truth. Emma's mother, Laura, had once worked on a film set that Johnny had been a part of years before she had met Michael. She hadn't been an actress or someone in the spotlight. She had been part of the crew, working behind the scenes. They had developed a friendship during the long days of filming, sharing conversations over coffee and late-night chats. After the crew had wrapped for the day, Johnny explained that Laura had been a kind soul, someone who saw through the glamour of Hollywood and connected with people on a real, human level. But there was more. As Johnny spoke, Michael realized that their connection had run deeper than mere friendship. Johnny had fallen for Laura, though their lives had taken them in different directions. They had lost touch, and when Johnny had heard of her passing, he had been devastated. He hadn't known she had a daughter or a family until he saw the obituary. And now, out of respect for the woman who had meant so much to him, Johnny felt a sense of responsibility toward Emma. Michael's emotions were conflicted. On one hand, he understood Johnny's motives and appreciated the kindness he had shown Emma. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort, knowing that this Hollywood star had once cared deeply for his wife. The conversation left him with more questions than answers, and a lingering tension grew between him and Johnny. How could he trust a man he barely knew, especially one who had loved his wife in the past? Meanwhile, Emma's life began to change in subtle ways. With Johnny's continued presence in her life, she started to open up more. She talked about her mother with Johnny in ways she couldn't with her father, and their bond grew stronger. But as Emma grew closer to Johnny, Michael felt an increasing sense of unease. He couldn't shake the fear that Johnny's influence over his daughter might be too strong, that Emma might come to see Johnny as a replacement for the father she had always known. The tension between Michael and Johnny came to a head one evening when Johnny visited their home. It was supposed to be a simple visit, a chance for Johnny to check in on Emma and spend time with her. But as the night wore on, Michael's frustrations bubbled to the surface. He couldn't hold back any longer, and in a heated moment, he confronted Johnny in front of Emma. He demanded to know what Johnny's intentions were, accusing him of trying to take over as a father figure in Emma's life. Emma, caught in the middle, watched as the two most important men in her life argued. Her eyes filled with tears, and she ran from the room. Unable to handle the emotional turmoil, Johnny stood there, stunned, while Michael's anger burned. But this was not the end. As Michael stood there, breathing heavily, he realized the silence between Johnny and Michael lingered in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Both men stood still, grappling with their emotions, while Emma remained upstairs, hiding in her room. Michael, overwhelmed by guilt, knew that his outburst had hurt not just Johnny, but most importantly, his daughter. He had always tried to protect her, but in doing so, he had let his own insecurities push her further away. Johnny's presence was never meant to threaten him. It was meant to help, but fear had clouded his judgment. Johnny, sensing the weight of the moment, spoke softly. "I'm not trying to replace you, Michael. Emma needs her father more than anything. But she's also grieving in a way that's different from you. She's just a child, and sometimes it helps to have someone who isn't as close to the pain, someone she can talk to without feeling like she's adding to your burden." Michael looked down, his fists clenched, and sighed deeply. He knew Johnny was right, but that didn't make it any easier. I don't know how to do this without Laura," Michael admitted, his voice trembling. "I don't know how to be enough for Emma. She's hurting, and I feel like I'm failing her." Johnny placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, his voice calm, but filled with empathy. "You're not failing her. You're doing the best you can, but you don't have to do it alone. Let me help, not as a replacement, but as a friend." For her sake, Michael's defenses finally crumbled, and he nodded slowly, realizing that what mattered most was Emma's well-being. She needed both of them, not a battle between them. It wasn't about who had loved Laura more or who was a better parent. It was about giving Emma the support and love she needed to heal. Upstairs, Emma had been listening, her small frame curled up on her bed. She had heard every word, and for the first time since her mother's death, she felt like something was shifting, like a weight was being lifted. She didn't want her father and Johnny to fight. She loved them both, and the conflict between them only deepened her pain. Slowly, she opened her bedroom door and walked downstairs. Her soft footsteps caught their attention, and both men turned to see Emma standing at the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes were filled with tears, but there was also a strength in her expression that neither had seen before. She walked toward them, and in a small but clear voice, she said, "I need both of you." Michael's heart broke at the sight of his daughter, and he bent down to embrace her, his arms wrapping tightly around her tiny frame. Johnny stood nearby, watching with a tender look in his eyes. It was a moment of quiet understanding. No more arguments, no more tension. They both knew that this was what Laura would have wanted, for Emma to feel loved and supported. The days that followed were not without challenges, but there was a new sense of peace in the household. Michael and Johnny found a way to work together. For Emma's sake, they shared stories about Laura, remembering the good times and letting Emma ask the questions she had been too afraid to voice before. Johnny continued to visit, not as a looming figure in Michael's life, but as a welcome presence who helped Emma heal. The town's gossip eventually died down, and life returned to a new kind of normal. Michael and Emma learned to navigate their grief, while Johnny remained a quiet yet significant part of their journey. His promise to Laura had been fulfilled, not through grand gestures, but through simple, meaningful acts of kindness and care. For Emma, her mother's memory lived on, not just in the objects Johnny had brought her, or the stories her father told, but in the love and strength she felt around her. She learned that loss didn't mean the end of love. It meant carrying that love forward. Even in the hardest of times, as the months passed, Emma grew stronger, her laughter returning little by little. And though the pain of losing her mother never fully disappeared, it softened into something she could live with. Michael, too, found a way to move forward, not alone, but with the support of those who cared for him and his daughter. He and Johnny had built an unexpected friendship, bound not just by the past, but by their shared commitment to Emma's future. In the end, the conflicts that once seemed so insurmountable had been resolved not through confrontation, but through understanding and love. The mystery of Johnny's connection to Laura had been revealed, but it was no longer the focus. What mattered most was that Emma had the love and support she needed to grow, to heal, and to remember her mother in the best possible way. As for Johnny, he knew his role in their lives was never meant to be permanent. He had come to fulfill a promise, and now that he was ready to step back. But he would always be there if Emma or Michael needed him. Some bonds, after all, could never be broken. And so, the story came to its natural conclusion, one filled with loss, healing, and ultimately, hope. Emma's life had been changed forever, not just by the tragedy of losing her mother, but by the love that surrounded her in the aftermath. And in the end, that love was what helped her, Michael and Johnny, find their way forward. Thank you for joining us in this journey. Remember, even in the hardest moments, love has the power to heal and bring people together in ways we never expect. Stay tuned for more stories like this, where we explore the strength of human connection and the impact it can have on our lives.